If someone had told Camille 5 years ago that she'd be carrying a child inside a peaceful countryside manor, surrounded by lavender hills and clean air, she would have scoffed. Laughed, even. But here she was, 31 years old, 7 months pregnant, and finally feeling like she belonged somewhere. The room she stood in was sunlit, spacious, and smelled faintly of chamomile from the freshly brewed tea on the nightstand. She ran her hands over the soft velvet of her gown, a maternity dress she had chosen with care. Soft violet, loose-fitting, and gentle against her growing belly. It reminded her of violets from childhood, the good kind of memory, the rare kind. Her husband, Alaric, entered quietly with a small porcelain cup. "For you, my love," he said, placing the tea in her hands. "And for you," he added with a smile, lowering himself to kiss her belly. Their baby responded with a flutter, as if recognizing his father's voice. Camille laughed. "That was a strong one. I think he likes you." "Of course he does. He knows where the good bedtime stories come from." It was peaceful. It was still. But peace, Camille knew too well, didn't always last. She turned slightly and looked out the window at the garden below. The baby shower was just a few days away, and everything had been carefully planned, the guest list small, the venue a cozy vineyard terrace just a short drive from the estate. It was to be her first celebration, truly hers, not borrowed or orchestrated for someone else's vanity. Not like the many celebrations of her youth. But a shadow had crept back into her life. 2 shadows, in fact, her mother Miri and her sister Sarah. Camille's childhood was ruled by Mireille's sharp tongue and Sarah's clever manipulations. Mireille, a once glamorous opera singer who never quite accepted that her spotlight had faded, had raised her daughters with drama as the backdrop to every meal. Sarah, younger and favored, had been the golden child, the legacy of beauty, as Miri called her. Camille had been the spare. The shadow. And now that Camille had built a life of her own, miles away from the performance, it was only a matter of time before they tried to reclaim the stage. The first warning sign came on a Wednesday evening. Alaric had just returned from the orchard with a handful of sun-ripened pears when the landline rang, a rare occurrence. He answered, then looked toward Camille with a guarded expression. "It's her." Camille took the receiver with a breath she didn't realize she was holding. "Hello? Camille," Mireille's voice sliced through the line, already impatient. "I wanted to speak about the shower. Sarah and I have adjusted a few things." Camille blinked. "Adjusted? We've changed the venue. That winery you chose is dreadfully rustic. We've booked the Chateau de Lys instead. More elegant. More appropriate. Invitations have already gone out." "Maman, no. I already made arrangements. Deposits were paid. My friends. I've handled it. You needn't fuss over logistics. And the dress you planned to wear, Sarah found a more tasteful one. Yours is far too clingy." Camille's hand tightened around the receiver. "I'm nearly 8 months pregnant, maman. My body's changing. I chose something comfortable." "Nonsense. A mother should look dignified. Not swollen." Camille's throat ached with the weight of old words. This was how it always began, gentle suggestions turned into commands. Disguised cruelty passed off as refinement. "Maman," she said slowly, "this shower is for me and my child. We're keeping the venue. We're keeping the dress." A sharp exhale. "So stubborn. Always seeking attention, just like when you were a girl. Do you even care what it's like for Sarah? Watching you thrive while she can't conceive?" The guilt was thrown like a dagger, aimed precisely. Camille felt Alaric come behind her, his hand on her back. She didn't have to say a word, he knew. "Mireille," he said, taking the phone. His voice was velvet over steel. "Camille needs rest. The shower plans are final. You're welcome to attend. Or not. But don't contact her again to cause distress." He hung up. Camille sat down slowly, her fingers trembling. Tears pricked her eyes. "Why can't she just be happy for me?" Alaric knelt in front of her, cupping her hands. "Because her love has conditions. But mine never will. Later that night, the phone rang again. This time it was her father, Adrian, a quiet man, always eclipsed by Mireille's brightness. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "She's just worried." "You've said that since I was 10, Camille replied, her voice dull. "It's not worry. It's control." Adrian sighed. "I'll be there. I'll bring them. Maybe. Maybe this time will be different." But Camille already knew the answer. The morning of the baby shower arrived with the scent of lavender drifting in through the windows. Camille stood in front of the mirror, smoothing her dress over her stomach. She didn't feel beautiful. She felt like a soldier preparing for battle. "You're radiant," Alaric said, fastening her necklace. "Whatever happens today, I'm with you. You and our son, we're a team." She placed a hand on her belly. The baby kicked, as if in agreement. The vineyard terrace was even more enchanting than she remembered. Ribbons swayed in the breeze, tables were lined with pale blue hydrangeas, and soft music drifted from a harpist by the arbor. Guests smiled and embraced her. Laughter sparkled like sunlight on wine glasses. For a moment, it was hers. All of it. Until it wasn't. Camille's shoes clicked softly against the stone terrace as she moved through a sea of smiling faces and warm embraces. The scent of honeyed pastries and fresh grapes lingered in the air, mixing with the soft perfume of blooming roses that climbed the pergola overhead. Olivia, her oldest friend and the one who had helped plan every detail, handed her a flute of sparkling water with blueberries floating inside. "You pulled it off," Olivia said, eyes shining. "This is magic." Camille smiled, her hand instinctively resting on her belly. "I feel like I'm in someone else's life." "No, this is yours," Olivia said firmly. "You've earned this." And for a brief, perfect window of time, Camille believed it. Her friends from university laughed as they took selfies beside the trellis, her colleagues from the art gallery admired the hand-painted nursery signs Olivia had hung, and the playlist hummed with soft cello covers of her favorite songs. Alaric, dressed in linen and calm confidence, stayed by her side like a silent guardian, attentive and relaxed. Then came the hush. It was subtle at first, just a ripple in the sound, like a sudden drop in wind. Camille turned toward the arched entrance of the terrace and immediately knew. They had arrived. Mireille walked in first, wearing a blazing red cocktail dress that shimmered in the afternoon sun. Her hair was coiffed into soft waves, and her lips painted a violet shade of crimson. Behind her trailed Adrian, looking small in his gray jacket, and Sarah, sleek, svelte, wearing a black dress tailored to emphasize her slim frame. Her posture was perfect, her expression unreadable. For a moment, the guests didn't know how to react. Some looked away politely, others whispered. Camille's heart sank. This wasn't a visit, it was an entrance. Sarah approached first, offering a tightly rehearsed smile. "Camille, congratulations," she said smoothly. "It's so you to host something so casual." Camille met her eyes. "Thank you for coming." Then Mireille stepped in, eyes scanning Camille from head to toe. Her voice dropped low, but her tone carried enough venom to curdle the air. "Couldn't you have chosen a more flattering dress? That belly is overwhelming." Camille stiffened. "It's a maternity gown, Maman. I'm 7.5 months pregnant." "Well, obviously," Mireille said loudly, drawing glances from nearby guests. "Always the center of attention, just like when you were a girl." Camille's breath caught in her throat. Before she could respond, Olivia stepped in, calm but firm. "Madame Mireille, Sarah, can I get you both something to drink? The chilled elderflower lemonade is a house specialty." She ushered them away with the grace of a seasoned diplomat, leaving Camille shaken but standing. Alaric appeared behind her, placing a hand gently at her lower back. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I will be," she whispered, though her fingers trembled. The party tried to move on. Guests laughed again, albeit more quietly. Games were played, gifts unwrapped, and Camille even managed a few genuine smiles. But beneath it all, she could feel it, the tension curling through the event like ivy, invasive and spreading. Mireille lingered at the bar, drinking champagne glass after champagne glass. Her eyes rarely left Camille. Sarah, meanwhile, embedded herself in conversations with Camille's friends, retelling childhood stories with sly jabs tucked beneath every laugh. She was always the bookworm, Sarah giggled to one of Camille's co-workers. So serious, even as a child. I was more the free spirit, dancing, laughing. You know, real life of the party energy. Camille overheard the comment and excused herself from a nearby table. She approached her friend Clara and placed a hand lightly on her arm. "Can I steal you for a moment?" Clara followed her gratefully. "She's intense," she murmured once they were out of earshot. "You have no idea," Camille said with a dry smile. Meanwhile, Mireille had moved from smug to sloppy. She cackled too loudly at Adrian's attempts to keep her quiet and shrugged off his calming hand. Camille knew that look in her mother's eyes. It was a performance warming up to its crescendo. "She's starting to fray," Olivia warned, gliding past Camille with a tray of tarts. "Keep close to Alaric." Camille nodded. "I knew this was going to happen. I just didn't know when." It was then that Olivia clapped her hands together and gathered everyone near the ivy-covered pergola. "Let's play a game," she announced brightly. "Advice for the mother-to-be. Everyone's written down a parenting tip. Camille will try to guess who wrote each one." Laughter bubbled through the crowd as Camille sat in the plush chair beside the gift table. Alaric stood beside her, smiling down as she picked up the first card. She didn't get to read it. "I have advice, too," Mireille slurred, rising unsteadily to her feet and lifting her glass high. The crowd quieted. "Children," she declared, "are born to punish their parents." The laughter died. Eyes darted to Camille, to Alaric, to Mireille. "Isn't that right, Camille?" she continued, voice rising. "Maman, please," Camille began, but her mother wasn't listening. "You always had to be the star. Always pushing poor Sarah into the shadows. And now this," she gestured toward Camille's belly. "This grotesque little show." Alaric stepped forward. "Madame Mireille, perhaps it's time to leave." She turned to him, eyes wild. "Oh hush. Is that baby even yours?" Gasps swept through the crowd. Camille stood abruptly, breath stuck in her throat. Adrian moved to intervene. "Mireille, that's enough." But she was beyond reason. Drunk, furious, and humiliated, Mireille shoved Alaric aside and stormed toward Camille. "You should never have been born," she screamed. And then, without warning, she swung. Her fist landed directly on Camille's stomach with a sickening thud. Camille gasped, her body folding inward. The pain was instant, sharp, and searing. Her heel caught the edge of the pool's marble border. She slipped. And fell. Camille didn't even feel the fall, just the moment her breath disappeared. Her body hit the pool water with a slap that echoed louder than the collective gasp from the guests. The world went cold in an instant, and her dress, once flowing and graceful, clung to her like a wet net. She sank before she even realized what had happened. The weight of the velvet, the shock of the blow, the disorientation, all of it dragged her under. For a few terrifying seconds, everything was silent. Muffled. Her vision blurred, water stinging her eyes. She kicked, but her limbs were sluggish. Her arms flailed, desperate, heavy. The sound of her own heartbeat, fast and panicked, pounded against her eardrums. The terror wasn't just for herself. It was for the tiny life inside her. The baby. Her baby. She clutched her stomach beneath the water, a desperate instinct. "No. Not like this. Please, not like this." Above, voices pierced the silence of the surface, distant, panicked, distorted by the water. Then came the clearest sound of all. "Camille." It was Alaric's voice. Suddenly, arms were around her. Firm. Warm. The water churned as Alaric pulled her upward, breaking through the surface in one sweeping motion. She gasped, choking as air hit her lungs again. Water streamed down her face. Her chest burned, but she was breathing. "I've got you," Alaric whispered, breathless but focused. "I've got you." He dragged her to the edge of the pool, and a couple of guests helped lift her out. Her body was trembling, soaked to the bone. Her hands flew instinctively to her belly. Is he okay?" she gasped, her voice hoarse. "Alaric, the baby. You're going to be okay. Just hold on." Chaos erupted around them. Olivia screamed for someone to call an ambulance. Adrian stood paralyzed, eyes wide with horror, while Mireille remained by the pool, her champagne glass somehow still in her hand, her red dress clinging to her knees like a cruel metaphor. But Camille only had eyes for Sarah. Her sister stood several feet away, not helping, not rushing to her side, just watching. Arms crossed. Face unreadable. But her lips curled, just slightly. A smirk. A smirk. Camille stared at her through waterlogged lashes, shivering on the flagstones with her husband shielding her body. That tiny, cruel smile from Sarah cracked something wide open inside her. It had never just been Mireille. Sarah had been part of this dance all along. Frank, the quiet, disappointing shell of a father Camille had long stopped hoping would intervene, finally stepped forward. He pulled out his phone and dialed with shaky fingers. "Yes. This is Adrian Leclerc. We need emergency services at Belle Côte Vineyard. My pregnant daughter has just been assaulted and pushed into a swimming pool. By her mother." His voice shook but stayed clear. Some guests began crying. Others simply watched, stunned and helpless. "Mireille," Adrian said, turning to his wife. "You've gone too far." She opened her mouth, but he cut her off. "Not this time." Just moments later, the sound of sirens echoed through the vineyard grounds. Red and blue lights washed over the stone terrace as paramedics rushed in with a stretcher. They gently lifted Camille, wrapping a warm blanket around her trembling body. One of them knelt beside her and placed a stethoscope to her belly. "Heartbeat is strong," he said, nodding. "But we need to get you both to the hospital now." Alaric rode in the ambulance with her, his hand in hers the entire way. Her head rested against his shoulder as tears streamed silently down her cheeks. "She hit me," she whispered. "She hit me and the baby." "I know," he said, his voice low and tight. "She's going to answer for it. I promise." Back at the vineyard, the police placed Mireille in handcuffs. The silk of her dress was torn, her expression blank as the officer read her rights. "You are under arrest for assaulting a pregnant woman." Sarah stepped forward, suddenly animated. "It was an accident," she insisted. "My mother was drunk, she didn't mean to hurt anyone." But the female officer gave her a flat look. "Multiple guests reported you smiled as your sister fell. You're being investigated for complicity. Please cooperate." And just like that, the curtain was pulled back. The performance was over. At the hospital, Camille lay on a narrow bed under soft yellow lighting, wires and monitors tracking her vital signs and, most importantly, the rhythmic heartbeat of her son. The dull ache in her belly was a constant reminder of the violence done to her, but so was the strength of that flickering pulse on the monitor. Alaric sat beside her, silent except for the gentle strokes of his fingers along her wrist. "I thought we lost him," she said softly. "But we didn't," he whispered. "You saved him, Camille. You saved yourself, too." She closed her eyes. For a long time, she didn't speak. She didn't need to. Then came a knock at the door. Adrian stepped inside, looking 10 years older than he had that morning. His face was drawn, his clothes slightly rumpled. "May I?" he asked. Alaric looked at Camille. She gave a quiet nod. Adrian sat down slowly, not meeting her eyes at first. "I'm sorry, Camille," he said at last. "I should have stopped her years ago. I should have stopped all of it." She said nothing. The words were long overdue. "I spoke with the officers," he continued. "She's being held overnight. There's enough to charge her with felony assault." Alaric nodded solemnly. "That's what she deserves." Adrian's voice cracked. "I've started divorce proceedings." Camille blinked. Of all the things she expected to hear, that wasn't one of them. "I stayed quiet for too long. I let her turn everything into a stage. I let her turn Sarah against you. But today, I saw her strike her own pregnant daughter. I saw Sarah do nothing. He reached into his pocket and placed a folded paper on the bedside table. I met with a lawyer at the station. I've consented to restraining orders, against both of them. And if you pursue legal action, I'll support it fully. Camille stared at him. Maybe it was too late for him to be the father she once needed. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for him to do one right thing. "Thank you," she said finally. He stood, his shoulders slumped, but a kind of clarity in his expression. "I'll be at the hearing tomorrow. Just focus on that child. On healing." When he left, Camille sank into her pillows, exhaustion pressing in around her. But inside, something else stirred, something powerful. Resolve. She would not raise her son in fear. She would not let this cycle pass into the next generation. She had survived. And now she would fight back. The courthouse in Vervain County was built from pale stone, its facade quiet and imposing, perched like a gatekeeper to justice on the edge of town. The morning air was crisp when Camille stepped out of the car, her steps slower than usual, her hand tucked into Alaric's arm for balance. She was still recovering, still sore, but her eyes held no weakness. Only resolve. This wasn't about revenge. This was about the future, hers, and more importantly, her son's. Inside the courtroom, the air was stiff with expectation. Wooden pews creaked under the weight of spectators, some friends, some neighbors, a few colleagues from the gallery, and even a couple of vineyard staff who had witnessed the chaos unfold. At the front, seated beneath the carved emblem of justice, was Judge Sabine Laurent. Her silver hair was pulled into a tight bun, her posture perfectly upright, her expression unreadable. Camille sat beside Clara, her attorney, feeling the cool wood of the table beneath her fingers. Across the room, Mireille sat at the defendant's table, clad in an ash-gray suit that made her look far less like the glittering diva she had always tried to be. Her posture was slouched, her eyes sunken, mascara faded under her eyes. She looked not like a monster, but like a fallen actress whose curtain had come down too late. Sarah was there too, sitting several rows back, her arms folded tightly. Her face showed no emotion. She had not been charged criminally, but Camille had filed for a civil restraining order against her, one that would be addressed before the end of the hearing. Adrien sat behind Camille, his presence quiet but solid. He hadn't wavered in the days since the attack. He'd filed for divorce. Given full statements to the police. Hired a lawyer. In his own slow, sorrowful way, he was trying to become something he'd never been, a protector. The proceedings began. Clara presented the case with poise and precision. She described the emotional buildup, the verbal abuse, the physical assault, the attack that sent a 7-month pregnant woman into a pool after being punched in the stomach. Witness after witness took the stand. Olivia, who saw the punch and the fall, a vineyard staff member who had pulled Camille from the water, guests who testified to Mireille's drinking, her slurred insults, and Sarah's passive smirking as Camille nearly drowned. The evidence was overwhelming. Camille listened with her hands folded over her belly, feeling the baby flutter beneath her fingertips, unanchored to keep her steady. Then it was her turn. She took the stand slowly, her legs still a little weak. The courtroom went silent. "I was 7 months pregnant when my mother punched me," she said, her voice clear. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a moment of passion. It was the end of a long line of control, criticism, and cruelty. She paused, looking directly at Mireille. "All my life, I was told I was dramatic, ungrateful, selfish. But when I tried to celebrate bringing a child into the world, that cruelty turned physical. If my husband hadn't pulled me out of that pool, if help had come seconds later, my baby might not be alive." A murmur swept through the room. Judge Laurent raised a hand for silence. Camille turned to the judge. "I'm not here to seek pity. I am here to say that no child, no woman, no family should be forced to endure this kind of silence. And I won't let it pass into the next generation." When she stepped down, Mireille was given the chance to speak. She stood, gripping the edge of her table with trembling fingers. "I didn't mean to hurt her," she said, her voice hoarse. I was drunk. I was overwhelmed. But she didn't apologize. Not once. Judge Leron leaned forward. Miss Marie Leclerc, this court does not tolerate violence, especially against those who are vulnerable, emotionally, physically, or otherwise. Your actions were reckless, deliberate, and cruel. The court finds you guilty of felony assault and endangerment. She banged her gavel once. You are hereby sentenced to 4 years in state prison. No chance of early parole. You will also undergo mandatory anger management and psychiatric evaluation. Furthermore, you are forbidden from making contact with Camille Leclerc or her child, directly or indirectly, permanently. A gasp escaped from Marie's lips. 4 years? I'm her mother. You forfeited that role, Judge Leron replied, her tone cool. When you endangered the life of your daughter and your unborn grandchild. Then, she turned her attention to Camille again. In addition, this court grants a full civil restraining order against Sarah Leclerc. Based on witness testimony, and your statement, she shall not come within 300 feet of you or your child, nor initiate any form of contact, physical or digital. Effective immediately. Sarah stood suddenly. I didn't lay a hand on her. You stood by and watched, the judge said, unmoved. And in doing so, you became part of the harm. Security stepped forward to escort Marie out. For once, she didn't perform. No tantrum, no protest. She simply lowered her head and walked out, her heels echoing like drum beats behind her. As the room emptied, Camille remained seated, her hands still cradling her belly. Alaric came to her side and kissed her forehead. It's over, he whispered. No, Camille said quietly. It's just beginning. 3 weeks later, Camille walked through the door of their countryside home and stood in the nursery. It was finished now, light cream walls with soft gold stars, a mobile shaped like hot air balloons swaying gently above a crib lined with velvet cushions. Outside, the world was beginning to turn green again. A letter arrived the next day, written in familiar handwriting, Sarah's. It was a carefully worded apology. A confession of regret. A plea for reconnection. Camille read it once, her expression unreadable. Then she folded it and placed it in the fireplace. Some doors, she thought, need to stay closed. Instead, she turned to Alaric, who was hanging a framed photo of the vineyard shower, taken just before the storm, in the moment when her smile had been real and unbroken. I'm going to raise our son without fear, she said. Alaric nodded. And without ghosts. As the fire crackled behind them, Camille placed her hand on her belly and whispered, You are already more loved than I ever was. And that will never change. The spring that followed the trial came early that year. The lavender fields behind Camille's home bloomed in waves of soft purple, the air rich with honeyed scent and new beginnings. Birds returned to the garden walls, and the orchard, still tender from winter's grip, buzzed with bees and blossoms. Inside the nursery, bathed in pale sunlight, Camille cradled her son. Julian. He was 2 weeks old, wrapped in a woolen blanket with tiny constellations embroidered across it, Olivia's gift, stitched by hand. His fingers, impossibly small and strong, curled around Camille's pinky, and his deep, steady breath swarmed the space between them. Camille hadn't stopped watching him since the moment he was born. His arrival had been quiet, in contrast to the violence that had preceded it. After hours of labor, Julian had entered the world beneath a veil of calm. The hospital delivery room had felt like a temple, Alaric's hand in hers, midwives whispering soft instructions, the warm weight of her son against her chest. Camille had cried, not just with relief, but with release. In Julian's first cry, she had heard not only the strength of a new life but the closing of a chapter she'd been trapped in since her own childhood. It was a sound that shook loose every hurtful word, every cold look, every belittling moment that had defined her mother's love. And now, here in the silence of their new home, Camille whispered to her son the kind of promises no one had ever made to her. You'll never be afraid of me. You'll never earn love, it will be yours from the start. You are enough. Exactly as you are. She rocked slowly in the glider chair Alaric had built, each creak in rhythm with her breath. Julian stirred, then settled. From the hallway, Camille heard Olivia's voice drifting closer, paired with the familiar clink of a serving tray. She entered with a cheerful knock, balancing a pot of tea, a slice of almond cake, and a bouquet of fresh marigolds. "You're officially being spoiled," Olivia grinned. Camille smiled. "As I should be. You look." Olivia paused, setting the tray down. "You look at peace." "I am." They sat together in silence, watching Julian sleep. "You know," Olivia said, "I think he's going to have your eyes." "I hope he has Alaric's calm," Camille murmured. "But I wouldn't mind if he got your loyalty." Olivia's eyes softened. They didn't talk about Mireille or Sarah anymore. The chapter had been closed decisively. Mireille was serving her sentence. Sarah hadn't attempted contact since her letter, the one Camille had quietly burned. Adrien sent gifts, hand-carved toys, lullabies transcribed from his youth, stories he used to tell Camille but had never been allowed to repeat. He had moved to a quiet village up north and wrote often, sharing how he was learning to be better, even if it was too late to undo everything. Camille wrote back, not out of obligation, but because she saw in him a man who had finally chosen light over comfort. It was more than she ever expected. Julian stirred in his sleep, murmuring softly. Camille brushed a thumb across his cheek. "He smiles in his dreams," she said. "Probably dreaming of you," Olivia replied. Later that evening, Camille and Alaric took Julian out to the garden. A soft quilt was spread over the grass beneath the old olive tree, and Julian lay between them, waving his fists at nothing in particular. Alaric leaned back, propped on one elbow, and watched them both with a quiet smile. "I can't believe we made this," he said. "Us? Here? After everything?" Camille nodded. "I still wake up waiting for the shadows." Alaric took her hand. "But they're not here." "No," she said. "They're not." The late afternoon light wrapped around them, golden and forgiving. Julian cooed, eyes wide, trying to focus on a fluttering petal drifting from the tree above. His laugh, high-pitched and sudden, made both of them laugh too. It was the first time Camille realized how loud joy could be. Later, as dusk painted the sky in hues of rose and violet, Camille sat with Julian in her lap and whispered stories to him. Not fairy tales, not yet, but real ones. Of the strength she didn't know she had. Of the love she never thought she deserved. Of the day she chose to break the cycle. And as stars began to prick through the darkening sky, she spoke one final promise. "You will never have to earn your safety. I will not be your shadow, I will be your shelter." Julian blinked up at her, eyes full of trust. Alaric returned from the house carrying 2 mugs of warm milk. He sat beside her and rested his head on her shoulder. "Do you think you'll remember this?" he asked. "Not the moment," Camille replied, smiling. "But maybe the feeling." They watched the stars come alive in the sky, Julian nestled between them. And in that stillness, without yelling, without judgment, without fear, Camille felt what peace truly was. Not just the absence of harm, but the presence of love. The kind that stays. The kind that heals.